Thank you for flying out from New York to talk with us today. It's great to have you back on campus. So everybody, I'd like to tell you take a bit of your time and tell you that you're attending a biannual speaker series, or semi-annual if you want to be pedantic. Every semester, the Nazarian College brings an incredible speaker to campus, and Michael Kramer is the fifth in our series. And he's the third of the series that's actually graduated from the Nazarian College or its predecessor. Some of our previous speakers have included Jane Werwind, the founder of Dermalogica, Steve Rebichin, the head of Amazon Alexa, and Michael Grillo, the award-winning film producer, who is the executive producer of Avengers: Infinity Wars. We'd like to thank the Lowenstein Foundation for making this series possible and helping us bring dynamic and highly successful speakers to CSUN who have each been masters of their craft. And I tell you, it does bring me great pleasure to introduce my former student, Mr. Michael Kramer. Michael is the CEO and a founding partner of Ducera Partners, an internationally recognized boutique investment bank specializing in complex corporate transactions. A native of the San Fernando Valley and a graduate of Cal State Northridge back in 1990, Michael began his investment banking career in 1990 as a financial analyst in the Los Angeles, actually it was a data entry clerk, wasn't it?
It was.
As a data entry clerk in the Los Angeles office of Houlihan, Lokey, Howard, and Zukin, called Houlihan Lokey in the trade. In 1994, Michael transferred to New York, and at the age of 26, he became the youngest partner in Houlihan Lokey's history. Following his tenure at Houlihan Lokey, Michael was a partner at Greenhill & Company and Perella Weinberg before he founded Ducera Partners in 2015. So you might not know what Michael does as an investment banker, but you certainly have read about some of the things he's been involved with. He's been involved in some of the biggest and most prominent front-page transactions in history, including the $70 billion sale of Monsanto Company to Bayer AG. He's currently involved with the restructuring of PG&E, which is a $35 billion transaction. The restructuring of Puerto Rico, $50 billion worth, the restructuring of iHeartRadio, a $20 billion deal, and even Neiman Marcus, a paltry $5 billion transaction. So he does the small things too. His historic clients have included the U.S. government during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. You know, we came out of that all right. It's Michael's fault that we survived. He also helped with the Hostess brands restructuring, GE Corporation, and he's been involved in more sports teams than I know about, but some of them include the Texas Rangers, the Dallas Stars, and the New Jersey Devils. So, in addition to traditional investment banking activities, Ducera and Mike have a strong focus on supporting companies and entrepreneurs in building and funding innovation, technology, growth equity, and venture capital activities. And through various controlled venture capital funds, whatever that means, and other sources of capital, maybe you'll tell us about what a controlled venture capital fund is after a while. Anyhow, Michael's been involved in funding and advising some of the country's most disruptive and innovative growth-oriented companies. So, Mike, let's get started. I know you have a lot to share, but let's start.
Do we have to start? We'll finish with that.
Well, that sounds good. Let's go back in time. So you graduated in 1990. I've got this nice list of questions here, and we'll begin with those, and we'll see where it goes from there. So you graduated in 90. Can you look back at of course you can. Please look back at your days at CSUN and tell us about the path that led you to where you are today. So how did you get started? What made you decide one day, you know, I'm a 19-year-old kid, I think I want to be an investment banker?
I don't know that I had the choice at some level. Back in 1990, many of you may either remember or have heard about, at the time there was this company called Drexel Burnham. Drexel was a very high-profile investment banking company at the time, and in 1989 it went bankrupt. When it went bankrupt, what effectively happened, at least from my standpoint, was there was a lot more well-qualified people looking for jobs at the time, because that business went completely out of business, and it was an LA-based business. I had an offer from a firm called Houlihan Lokey, who was a much smaller player in the investment banking business. That offer was as a data entry person, not necessarily as an analyst. But at that point, as soon as Drexel went bankrupt, I figured I was going to have a hard time getting a job, so I took the job that I had in hand and really just sort of ran with that. From there, I guess I did a decent job at data entry. And what does that mean? My job at the beginning was when someone went out for a meeting, they brought a business card back, they put it on my desk, and I had to put it into the computer, all the contact information on that. In addition to that, I had the role of going back 5 years, to go back to all the business cards that everybody got for 5 years. And that was what was going to supposedly keep me busy. I moved pretty quickly through that, and it got to the point where they didn't have enough to keep me busy during the day. So they said, well, we have this analyst program going on over here. Why don't you just go sit in that for 6 weeks? Go do whatever you're going to do over there, and we'll figure out something when you get out of it. I think they forgot I was in there, because after 6 weeks, I just ended up on an analyst track on that side of it.
Okay, so you started out as an analyst, and you were, what, 19, 20?
Yeah, about 19, yeah.
Okay, so what happened after that?
They beat me up, and I worked really hard. In investment banking, it's as many of you know, it's average work week is probably in the 80 to 100 hours a week on that, if not more. So I jumped feet first into it. I mean, my career started by literally just staying in the office day in and day out after it. At the end of the year, which was really a 6-month period, because you start in the summer and then the end of the year is a December time frame, they came and they gave me my review, and they said, okay, well, how much bonus do you want to make? What do you think? What should you do? And all that. And for some reason, I said, well, I think I should be an associate. And an associate is the next level up, but it was sort of 3 years out. So after 6 months, I asked to be an associate, and they kind of laughed at me and said that was never going to happen, and that no one's ever gone from an analyst to an associate, let alone in 6 months. And lo and behold, I had a couple of guys that I worked for that really believed in me at that point in time, and they actually did it. And they made me an associate.
So get the timing here. So that's 7.5 months after starting as a data entry person.
Yes.
Okay.
So I had, and I really look back on it, there's a couple of guys there that really did believe in me and gave me that shot to sort of go forward and take that position. And throughout my career, actually at Houlihan, again, a very interesting thing. I think you said in their 26, I became a partner, so that was on the scheme of things, fairly aggressive time frame on it, but it really does relate to these two guys that I work for. And more importantly, which in hindsight, at the time I didn't think much of it, they actually made me a co-equal with them very early on in the career, which again, for those of you who have worked in a services firm or frankly any firm, for someone to put their ego off to the side and sort of bring someone in at that level is pretty unique. So I've been fortunate enough, not only there, but in many places of my life, to have people that have sort of opened up and given me the shot.
Fantastic. So your career moved after Houlihan. You went with Greenhill. And was it same kind of job, same kind of activity?
It was the exact same job. So for those of you who don't know, Bob Greenhill was sort of one of the titans of the investment banking industry. He ran Morgan Stanley, ran Smith Barney. He went off and started his own firm called Greenhill and Company. They approached me in 2000, I think, and said, why don't you come over here and run our restructuring group, run our investment bank, and do all that. And it was one of those things where the star, the sun, and the moon sort of lined up, and I said, yeah, what the heck, I'll go over there. Very similar position. I spent about 5 years there. I went from being the 10th partner there to 4 years in, we went public, one of the first investment banks to go public. But again, an interesting thing, and it's something that I've experienced my whole career, is fit is an important component. I said Bob was a wonderful guy, but he came from a very white shoe environment. He came from Morgan Stanley and Smith Barney, and when I announced that I was leaving Houlihan and going over to Green Hill, there was a lot of questions like, why are you doing this? Are you sure you know what you're doing? The Wall Street Journal had a big article on, here's this guy going from Houlihan to this very white shoe firm. And people would ask me, are you ready to be in that white shoe environment? Because that's not, frankly, who I was or who I am today. And I jokingly say I showed up my first day in tennis shoes, my white tennis shoes. That's not what they meant by white shoe. But it was a very different experience living in, working in an environment where there were highly pedigreed professionals that had this perception of, they had to be in a very white shoe environment. And from my perspective, I did quite well there. I just never sort of felt like the right sort of fit from a cultural perspective on that side of it. So I left after about 5 years.
And you went there to Perella Weinberg?
And I went, it was interesting. We went public, and exactly 1 year to the day after we went public, I left. And I thought what I was going to do is run a family office, spend time with my wife and kids, and do all that kind of stuff, do some investing. I went out and bought a bunch of assets, companies to control. After about 2 or 3 months of doing that, very vividly remember asking my wife what we were going to do for lunch that day. She said, I'm going out, and you should go get an office outside the office. So she sent me out to get an office outside, and I ended up hiring up a couple of people, and we started just doing some small deals. And then Perella came by and asked to buy us, so we actually sold our little firm at that point to Perella.
And then the new firm's been around for a couple of years now?
So, yeah, we started Ducera about 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
Coming on 4 years.
Okay. So, what kind of skills did you develop at CSUN that you still find helpful?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
I'm just reading what's on the sheet.
What kind of skill? I mean, I think I would put it in a couple ways. Obviously, this is where I learned the basics of not only some of the basic business acumens of accounting and finance and all that kind of stuff, but I think the experience of being in college was a much broader experience than just the accounting class, or of course the finance classes were great. I had him 5 times. But it was the ability to really learn how to learn. I mean, I think when you go through middle school and high school, you're going through a bit of a process. When you get into college and university, it's a little bit different. There's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more judgment that comes into place, and the ability to learn how to learn, and the ability to actually be a little bit more bold in what you were doing. In high school, they told you where you were going. You were going to take these 5 classes, and you're going to go from this class to this class. In college and here, you had to create your own path on that, and I think that's today still very much what happens in life.
So let's talk a bit more about that. Did you find it difficult to make it to Wall Street coming from a non-target school in Los Angeles?
So did I find it more difficult? So I had the opportunity. I had a foot in the door. I didn't have a foot in the door as an investment banker. I had the foot in the door as an employee. Again, no difference, but just on different paths. So I got very fortunate to have that opportunity. What I have found, and everybody, when I was put into that analyst class, everybody in that analyst class was from Harvard or Yale or Wharton or Princeton or all the other what you'll call sort of targeted schools on that side of it. What I found, which was interesting, is 2 days after I got into the program, it didn't matter what school I went to on that. People weren't asking, what school did you go to, or I wasn't getting put on certain deals because I went to one school or the other school. What became important was, how did you perform at your job, right? Were you able to do what was required? were you able to do what was required in a positive way, and were you able to grow from that? The one thing I did find a bit challenging was early on in my career, call it the first 3 or 4 years of my career, if I wanted to make a move, or if I wanted to sort of think about going somewhere, or someone wanted to interview me for something, they did focus on the traditional resume component of it. So what school did you go to, what GPA did you get, that kind of stuff on that. So early on in my career, while I was competing with people that had, for lack of a better way of saying it, more of a pedigreed approach or background on it, that was what was looking at. 3-4 years into my career, again, it didn't make a difference. As I sit here today, if I were to go apply for another job in investment banking, I don't have to provide a resume that said, here's what school I went to. What people look at is, what did you accomplish in your career? What deals have you done? What businesses have you built? And that kind of stuff. So, it's probably hard to open that first door without being from the target schools. It's probably hard to make moves early on in one's career, but performance always sort of trumps that type of stuff. And I do think, like everything else, technology today is going to level that playing field. There's a lot of things going on today in terms of hiring and screening and things like that, where the actual place you went to school is going to be less important than the actual characteristics of the individual as technology starts to come into play on that.
Fantastic. So you've got all these people here. What bit of advice would you give these CSUN students and recent graduates who may not have a lot of connections? What advice would you give them about trying to build their personal networks and being able to try and make it in their career?
So in terms of how to build the network, I would say focus. It's one thing to just go out and meet everybody. But if you have a goal or something that you're trying to accomplish, you have to be focused in how you want to get there, how to get there, and who you want to interact with. So if you have an interest in being an accountant or a CPA, don't spend your time trying to go out and meet investment bankers on that side. So have some level of focus in terms of how you're building that network and where you're sort of building it. The other thing that I would say is, as you're trying to build that network, and the reason you're trying to build that network is you're, not to be crass, but you're trying to get something out of that relationship. Right, it's a give and take. The old adage is decision makers like to deal with important people and decision makers. So, are you important to that person? What can you bring to that person in that network? I think is an important thing. So just going up and saying, hi, give me a job, doesn't really do much to somebody. You're not going to be very successful at that.
Sounds good. Okay, so that's titled here, Reflecting Back. Now we have a general set of questions on your career today. First question, I'm going to read it and then I'm going to paraphrase it. It reads, what type of business acumen is needed to be in your role? I'm going to paraphrase that. You have certainly a lot of understanding of business to run your own company, but also to be a consultant to others on all kinds of issues in business. Do you view yourself as more of a generalist or more of a specialist? How would you describe your awareness and focus and set of business skills and business interests?
So I think the first thing, I probably view myself much more as a generalist. I operate in multiple different industries, multiple different products, multiple different jurisdictions or countries in that. However, a lot of this, there is some common threads through it, right? And frankly, the biggest thread is sort of trust and credibility on that. You can't sort of walk into a boardroom of a Fortune 500 company or a middle market company and give advice and not, if you're not trusted, that advice is not going to be listened to. So you have to be trusted. You have to develop the trust. You have to develop the credibility to be in there. And that comes from a lot of different things. The technical, what we always talk about is the technical aspects of effectuating your deal. There's thousands and thousands of people that can do that. There's lots of people that can value a company. There's lots of people that can, predict what a stock price is going to be or something like that.
Some of them even accurately.
Some of them even accurately. But what they have to do is they have to trust the advice, trust the reason that you're giving the advice, and focus on, from our standpoint, we always say, you got to do the right thing in all situations. And we find ourselves oftentimes as generalists in situations where we're not the right person or firm to do that. And even though someone's saying, hey, we want you to do this, we're going to pay you millions of dollars to do it, from our standpoint, the right thing to do is to say, no, we're not the right person. Go find, Dr. Phil. He's the right guy to do it. And that's what sort of creates that sort of credibility.
Okay, so people here come from a lot of backgrounds and have overcome a lot of challenges, many of them, to come to school at CSUN. What's one of the biggest career challenges that you have faced, and how did you overcome that challenge?
So the biggest career challenge that I've faced is something I probably face still today, which is continuing to build my career and build my firm and create relevancy at the firm. So I'm not sure I've overcome that. I think it continues to sit in front of me today. I jokingly say every morning I get up scared out of my mind, what am I going to do today and how am I going to add value? And at the end of the day or in the evening when I go home, I'm pretty upset half the time that I didn't get enough done on that. And, being the CEO of the firm, particularly a services-oriented firm, there and any firm, frankly, is irresponsible for a lot of people and a lot of their livelihood, which is one thing. It's everybody is working because they want to be compensated for it, but also their development, their career development, and their futures. And one of the things that it's constantly a challenge for me is how do we build our firm? How do we build our organization? How do we create a scenario that we can, look someone in the eye and say, you should come work for us. This is a long-term career and you're going to have a great trajectory. And then I go back to one of the things that we said in the very opening when I talked about these two guys that made me equal partners with them very early on. That's what people want. People want the opportunity to be able to do that. And so that, to me, that's the biggest challenge that I face every day is to try and create that environment and create a firm that has a longevity to it.
Okay, investment banking is one of those jobs one of those career areas that people know a lot about because of Hollywood and television, but I don't think that people have really a good understanding of what a day in the life of Michael Kramer involves. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about one of your favorite deals, and not just the top, high concept television version, but what happened from the beginning to end. Could you walk us through something kind of soup to nuts, the stages involved in doing the kinds of things that you do?
So an example of a deal that's interesting?
Sure, an example of a deal that you find particularly fun.
Something that I'm sure everybody in this room has heard about, Hostess. The great American icon, the Twinkie. We can't live without our Twinkies, right? Several years ago, I was called by the board of Hostess. They called me up and said, hey, we're having a lot of financial trouble. We're running out of money. Don't know how we're going to continue to sort of go forward. Can you come in and help us think through this on that? It's probably, an average size deal, not mega deals like some of the ones as you went through, but, a really, really well-known brand on that. So I got hired by the board. The one thing I think is important to note is when I get involved in these situations, or any investment banker gets involved in these situations, it's a it could be a multi-year process. It's not like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You're involved in these transactions for, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. I've been involved in certain deals for, 3, 4 years on that side. So you start to develop these interesting relationships working with all the different people. In that situation, it was very interesting because the conclusion that we came to, besides the fact that we were losing a lot of money and we didn't have enough money to pay our bills, we had to figure out how we sort of revived the company. And what was very obvious is it had become I don't want to say an issue with the unions because that implies it was their fault, but the union contracts that were at the company were just not conducive with the business as it sits today. And again, it's very easy to say it was the union's fault. As my wife told me, it's someone in the C-suite actually signed those union contracts, so it's not, it goes both ways on that. So what we did in that situation, I actually had the privilege of, we had 42 different unions, or 42 different union contracts in there, but in, like most things in life, there's sort of an 80-20 rule, right? So 20% of the unions actually represented the disproportionate amount of it. And in that situation, it was the United Teamsters and the Bakers. So the Teamsters were the lead union, so I got to spend 6 months of my life, probably 3 or 4 days a week, down in DC at the most beautiful office I've ever been to, which is the headquarters of the Teamsters, negotiating with Jimmy Hoffa Jr. About what we would do to modify the terms of the agreement. And it went from everything to how many days was someone going to work to how many drivers could take Twinkies versus bread and all that kind of stuff. And we actually cut a deal with him. He was an incredibly tough counterparty, but we cut a deal. And then we thought, hey, we're going to save this thing. We're in the right direction. Then we got to the Bakers, and the Bakers just decided that they weren't going to cut a deal with us. Didn't matter what deal we offered, wasn't going to happen. The guy that ran the union was about to get reelected, and his view of the world was he wasn't going to get reelected by cutting a deal on that they had to fight. So if any of you really followed the situation, you remember the company actually totally shut down because of that. And we totally shut the company down because that was the only way that we could deal with the union contracts. And we ended up about 6 months later turning around and selling it for $1 billion. And when we were talking to the unions, we were talking about giving them equity at about $500 million. So they had the opportunity to almost double, create hundreds of millions of dollars. But it was a political issue, not in the sense of government, but political in the sense of personality that actually got in the way of it. So in many ways, that's kind of what we deal with all the time. Is it's not just financial issues, there's political issues, there's social issues, governmental issues that come into play, but they all tie back to the financial aspects of it. And again, looking at Hostess, in many ways it was a very successful deal because we were sold it for $1 billion, twice as much as what anybody thought. But it was a failure in some respects because a lot of people lost their jobs in the process of it. So that again, that sort of hits a bunch of highs and lows on a situation.
All righty, thank you. So you've worked with some technology companies. You seem to own some technology companies. How has technology impacted investment banking?
So. We take a slightly different approach where we don't think about companies as technology companies or not. Our view of the world is you're either embracing technology or you're going out of business on that. So one of the things that we found very early on in our new firm, one of the things we did is instead of starting a firm and saying, hey, we're going to do the same thing everybody else did, every other investment banking firm did, we took this novel approach I say flippantly, and we went to all of our clients and we said, what do you guys want out of an investment banker? You're the one who are paying the fees, you're the ones that are asking for the service. We asked them what they wanted. And pretty universally what we found when we went to talk to these companies is they were all very, very focused on how technology is going to affect their business, or how they could use technology to grow their business. So how are they going to get disrupted, or how are they going to be the disruptee on that? So we, from the get-go, really embrace this concept that we have to become knowledgeable about technology and how it is going to affect companies. One of the things that we're seeing today is technology has always affected the business world. Yet the cycles to which the effect is taking place are much more condensed. So you used to have 10-year cycles where something new was going to come along and affect a business, and it would take 10 years to work through. Today you can see things being nascent to a peak impact to gone or disrupted in 3 years on that. So being able to sort of understand those types of things are really important. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on is, again, technology is kind of a weird word, right? When I think of technology, I think someone's creating some new computer programming language or supercomputer or something like that. But we've really moved. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that incredible innovation going on. But a lot of the innovation that's happening today is really just taking existing stuff that's out there and applying it to everyday businesses. So a perfect example of that is you look at Uber, one of the most valuable private companies, if not public companies out there. It's really not an innovative technological advancement. They took, GPS technology, apps, the ability to create an app, and some big data, put it all together and solved a very regular everyday issue that we deal with. So what was innovative and masterful about it is how they pulled different pieces of it together to create that valuable company, as opposed to coming up with a cure for cancer or a new supercomputer or something like that. And that's what we're seeing a lot of today, is that disruption is actually coming from areas that are not, they're innovative in terms of how you use the technology, not the creation of the individual technology, even though there's tons of that going on too.
All righty, thank you. So when you're talking about the Hostess deal, it's pretty clear that you were not the only person working on that project. You have teams, there's a structure, there are a lot of people who get involved. So what are some common challenges that you face when building, leading, and managing teams, and how do you overcome those common challenges?
So that's a softball, because we just had an earlier session where we went.
I'm just reading my script, slow and over the plate.
So, I think what I would say is, I'm fortunate enough and, humbled to be sitting up here in front of everybody and talking, and I've been driven around campus all day today with all these. Every time I turned around, there's a picture of me on that. It was kind of weird on that side. And so, throughout my career, I have, unquestionably been given the opportunity to sort of be at the forefront. I get a lot of credit for a lot of the successes of the deals that you've gone through and things that people have read about. But what I do know is, and as you say, I have a strong team that's with me and always been with me and always been part of what I do. So, today I have, I'm the CEO of the company, but I have 8 partners that have been with me the majority of their career. And the success that I get the benefit from is really all of our success, right? I get a disproportionate amount of the accolades from it, but there's no way that I could have done it without all of them supporting me and everybody that supports them and the whole organization. And I think, early on, it's something that I did learn is that team, or any team is really important. We've talked about this a lot, where you can be the smartest financial modeler or the best accountant or any of that kind of stuff. But unless people want to work with you, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to sort of fit into the culture on that. And I've learned both from being the guy that has to manage the culture, and frankly, I've learned from being the guy that disrupted the culture. As my ambitions early on in my career sort of grew, and I saw the opportunity, it's fair to say sometimes I probably, if I had a chance to do it again, I'd do it a little differently. I wouldn't have done it as aggressively as I had. So today I get to sit on the other side, and when I look at it, I see, okay, how is this person behaving relative to that person? And I know who I would bet on. So making sure that you have that right team, that team works together. That right team is not defined as the best people at everything. It's the right people for the right jobs on that.
All righty. So we're in a bit of an uncertain economy and maybe looking at an economic slowdown. You have the benefit of ties here and also heavy involvement in the rest of the world. Do you have any advice to the people here who might be looking for careers or jobs? What sector or what industry group they might be looking at? Specifically, the example here is in investment banking. Do you think they should be going more into restructuring or more into M&A? Or are there whole other vistas that you think are where the new rosy futures might lie?
I think there's clearly industries or areas that there's, rosier futures and, disproportionate growth. There's not going to be a lot of growth in a retailing company, for example, or that sector. To me, where the real growth areas, clearly, and I define it as areas that are going to grow, exponentially, but also areas that are a little untapped, right? Where there's going to be the least amount of sort of sophisticated and developed expertise in it. It would be things like blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Frankly, esports, I think is going to be a huge growth area on it. What I'll call precision ag. So agriculture and applying technology to agriculture, and the changing economies as people grow and eat more and eat better foods and things like that. Maybe a bit controversial, but the cannabis industry is going to be an industry that is going to show some very interesting growth as it goes through its regulatory changes and things like that. That said, I would strongly counsel against sort of saying, hey, I think cryptocurrency is a great industry, therefore I'm going to go create my career in that. What I would create my career in or focus my career on is something that I'm very interested in, right? At the end of the day, you can have a job, and your performance in your job is going to be significantly impacted by how much you enjoy it. You spend a disproportionate amount of your life working, and a disproportionate amount of your day. So if you don't like it, it's going to come through in what you're going to do. So, should someone go into restructuring versus M&A versus cryptocurrency versus e-commerce or whatever, I think it's an individual choice. I have my own preferences because I know what I enjoy doing. So what I would just sort of counsel everybody to do is find something that you can get passionate and excited about and sort of drive with that.
Well, that leads us to the next question then. So did you end up exactly where you wanted to be?
I don't think I know. I don't think I knew where I wanted to be or where I want to be. I mean, I am absolutely, fortunate to be where I am and have a great professional career, a great personal life. I got my family, some of my aunts and uncles sitting here in the front row on that side, surprising me today. So I'm in a great place. I really am. Did I end up where I wanted to be? I have no idea. yeah, I didn't know where I wanted to be. I mean, you know, I wanted to be a multi-billionaire so I could go buy a Mercedes, right? I didn't understand that, you know, you didn't need to be that to get a nice car on that side. So you know, to me, I'm thrilled with where I'm at, and I'm excited about where I can potentially take it. And frankly, what I was looking for when I was 20 and 30 and 40 is very different than what I'm looking for as as I'm 50 today. You know, your priorities change and things like that.
So you've got a bunch of people listening here. What advice would you give a CSUN student today who might want to follow in your footsteps?
Don't.
You don't need the competition.
Yeah, no, I don't want the competition. No, but I mean, don't follow in my footsteps. Follow your own footsteps, right? It goes back to what I was saying earlier before. You know, because I like doing restructuring for certain types of companies and things like that. It doesn't mean that's what you're going to like. What I would say is create your own. You know, the best way to predict the future is create your own future on that side of it. So, don't follow my footsteps. Don't follow anybody's footsteps. Follow your own. Create your own path on that. That would be the big advice I'd give on that side of it. Everybody's an individual, right? And, create your own individual goals, your own individual path, and capitalize on that and drive from there.
So you are a Northridge graduate who has gone into the world of Ivy League and stellar degrees. What does it feel like to be there at the top of the firm with all these people with their supposedly fancier pedigrees reporting to you?
It's got to feel good. In fairness, it felt much better earlier. Earlier on in my career, that's, I thought about it earlier when I was, mid-career. Hopefully I'm still mid-career, earlier in my career.
You're approaching middle age.
Exactly. But the other thing I think that it has done is it sort of created a different way that we look at it on that side. We have a tendency to sort of look beyond the Ivy League degrees or beyond the target markets and say, what are the characteristics of the people that we're looking for beyond just what school they went to and stuff like that. So, we're smaller relative to the other big banks out there. We punch way above our weight, but we also sort of think about it from, who do we want in our firm, not only today, but what can that person sort of develop to. We do have people that don't come from targeted schools that have done incredibly well.
Very good. That is the end of the prepared script. I'm going to ask the powers that be here. Do we open up for questions at the floor? All righty. Do we have microphones? Okay, we have a microphone here. Does anyone have questions? We've got a question over here. Part of our exercise program, so the mic person will be able to run around.
I come from a sports background. I was running your investment banking on, say, for instance, the Texas Rangers.
I'm sorry?
A sports background, your deal on the Texas Rangers. Can you walk us through that deal?
So one of the things that I've spent a lot of time on is working with sports franchises. So I sold the Texas Rangers, represented them in their sale. The Dallas Stars, the Trailblazers, the Cleveland Browns, New Jersey Devils, Pittsburgh Penguins. So again, while we're more product oriented, a little success begets success on that. So once we did a few sports franchises, we actually get involved in them as they come about. The interesting thing about it is I'm a sports nut. I love sports, so I think it's really cool when we get to do it. The problem is they just don't happen that often. You don't see sports teams sell, maybe one or two a year or things like that. So while we do a lot of it and they're great to talk about, we have a large market share, but it's not a big market on that side of it.
All righty, next question. Right up here.
Hi, good evening, sir. So my question for you is, are fraternity connections prevalent on Wall Street?
Fraternity?
Yes, sir.
I don't know the answer to that, but what I would say is any type of organization that has sort of a long history to it and community to it develops some sort of background. So there's things like, lacrosse. The lacrosse community has a huge presence in Wall Street, ironically. You would never guess that. So I think, it depends on the individual organizations and how you sort of leverage off of it. So, not having been in a social fraternity, I don't know, but my guess is there probably is some sort of component to it. But broadly speaking, organizations as itself, there are sort of ties. Starts with, colleges, what college you went to, that has some strength to it. What sports you played, what social component you were in it on that side.
Okay. So any on this side?
I think we have one in the back of the room.
In the back of the room?
Hello, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Adrian, and I'm the president of the CSUN Blockchain Society here on campus. It's a blockchain club. And you had mentioned blockchain earlier. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I'd like to know how you equip yourself with the knowledge to prepare yourself for market trends, emerging markets, and things of that nature in finance.
So at some level, it's no different than school, right? If you want to sort of learn something, you sort of immerse yourself into it. You start by reading, you start by doing the research. Again, you ask one of the things you learn in college, that's one of them. But I think the other thing you do is your network gets bigger and your access gets bigger. You start to call the people you know and say, okay, can you educate me about this and take advantage of that? So, I mentioned blockchain. And, obviously, you have an interest in that. We very early on seeded one of the largest blockchain companies out there called Digital Currency Group, a gentleman by the name of Barry Silbert. So anytime I have a question about that, I call Barry up and I say, what is this blockchain thing, and how is it being used, or who can you put me in touch with in order to do that on it. So it's conventional research that sort of grows over time with your network, and once you broaden your network, you have the ability to not only make your research a little bit more efficient, it probably becomes a little bit more practical because you're dealing with practitioners at that point in time on it, and it makes it a little bit more efficient, which I think is
Okay. I think right here is next.
Hello, Mr. Kramer. My name is Anthony Monroy, and thank you for being here. My question is, with the GDP growth almost doubling throughout the past year with corporate tax cuts, personal tax cuts, and government spending, do you think this is the cause of Dow Jones' tremendous run recently? Also, would you say that we are in a bull market?
Well, I think technically we are definitely in a bull market. So, you lay out all the different sort of GDP growths and all that kind of stuff. I think the big debate right now is that permanent, or is it a one-time shot to it? I think the latest economic data would probably say it was a one-time shot, and that the expected sort of stimulus coming from that is probably not what was expected on that coming out of it. So that's a lot more lofty of a question than I have to answer in terms of I don't know where the economy is going on that side of it. Again, I guess maybe it goes to the previous questions. How do I sort of figure it out? We have macroeconomic analysts that work for us that tell us a whole bunch of stuff. But then we go out and we call the CEOs of companies and say, what are you guys seeing? Is this making an impact, or is it not making an impact? Are you, being incentivized to invest back into the economy on that? And I think one of the things that's very interesting And one of the changing components of our economy is before politics and government and all that kind of stuff, it always had a place in what was happening, 5, 10, 15% of the deal. Today, it's a much bigger component of it. And it's a bigger component in terms of, predicting what the government's going to do or not going to do, because it creates a bit of confidence or lack of confidence. So what people are trying to, and CEOs are thinking about is, are they confident about the economy or are they not confident about the economy on that side of it? And I think, I guess you call him President Trump. Actually I know him. I was his lead director. So, he is very unpredictable. And I think that's sort of creating a little bit of the volatility that we have in the environment. And again, we've never seen anything like this. I think, a lot of his policies are first of all, I don't think he's a policy zealot by any means. He just wants to get something done. And I'm not sure what he knows what he wants to get done. But what's going on, I think, is we're being distracted a lot, and the economy is being distracted a lot by what's being said versus what's being done on that. And I think, we'll see how that sort of plays out over time. Again, you go to the question of technology. We never had a president that had access to Twitter on that, and it's amazing the impact that it's having, because it does, obfuscates a little bit of what's going on from a policy standpoint, like it or like the policy or dislike the policy.
All righty. How about this gentleman here? Then we'll get back to you.
Hello, Mr. Kramer. Thank you for coming by today. My question was, it was mentioned that you were involved with the 2008 financial crisis. Can you elaborate more on what your role was during that period? And also, when it comes to working in the accounting field, do you think there's a easier transition if you work in public accounting and you go into maybe investment banking?
So, two questions. I'll start with the last one. I think the accounting field is probably one of the best places anybody can learn about a company or learn about how companies work and financial acumen. So, I think it's a great place to start, and I think it's a great place to take you almost anywhere you want to go on that side. So, if you want to go through that process at the beginning, I chose not to go the accounting route, but I think it's an incredible building block for what you can do, and I think we value those skills enormously. In terms of the 2007-2008 financial crisis, how was I involved? Specifically from a professional standpoint, I represented the U.S. government, and in particular the Treasury, United States Treasury, and the FDIC. If you remember, one of the big issues in the financial crisis was the financial wherewithal and health of the banking system on that, and they had what they called the SIFIs, the significantly important financial institutions. So I represented the government and the FDIC in working with all of the different financial institutions in terms of how much capital should they have, how much should we regulate them, how much capital should we regulate them to have. So should they go out and raise in order to be financially healthy? What types of stress tests were they going to have to go through in order to continue to operate and all that kind of stuff? So, it was a fairly broad mandate that really dealt with all the different large financial institutions. What was interesting about that was large financial institutions, again, to show a little bit of my ignorance, I thought that was Citibank and JP Morgan and 2 or 3 other companies out there. I think we ended up, there was about 50 what we deemed to be financially significant companies, financial institutions, and those went all the way from GE, a large industrial company that had a huge finance business in it, to insurance companies, to banks. So the financial system was hinging on much more than just the banks that were out there.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer, for being here. My name is Edgar Hartunian. I'm actually an alumni of CSUN. I graduated in 2016. And I wanted to ask you a question because as soon as I graduated, I applied for a bunch of jobs, but I was unemployed. So what I did was I started my own financial services company. And all around me, people are always telling me that, hey, you always need to be inside of a big name firm, and that's how you would get to a higher level of pedigree someday. So I was not employed by any of the big firms. They declined me. So in this day and age, it's just me on the phone, and I'm trying to get through the deal flow, trying to contact people and working with people. So I just wanted to ask you, is that true that you would need to kind of have your foot in the door to get to, you know, a level of where you are today? Or would you have to say that it would be experience in, you know, bringing in deal flow and you know, building the dream team to be able to get to that level?
So I don't think you have to do anything, right? There's lots of people that have gotten and become successful from doing lots of different things and starting different ways on that. So I don't think there's a formula for success. To be honest, you know, doing it on your own is harder than, you know, doing it within some level of larger institution. That said, if you're successful at doing it on your own, the upside of it is much bigger than doing it on the inside of a company. And one thing that's always talked about, that I've always heard, is, you know, it's safer to be employed by a big guy as opposed to a smaller firm or something like that. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think it's only safe if you're good at what you do. You know, you're safe in a big firm if you're good, and you're not safe if you suck on that. In a small firm, if you're good, you're safe, and, you know, on that. So I don't think size per se is important. Probably is a little bit harder to do it on your own.
There's someone with a hand back there. Yeah, this person here. Would you stand up? They can find you.
Put your hand up for me.
The woman back behind has been holding her hand up about 3 times. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Hello, Kramer. I'm an international student, and I want to know, because you just mentioned you are fortunate enough. I want to know, so you are so successful to us, but you must have get through a lot of, you know, hard times. I want to know, how do you get through the hard times? Thank you.
How do I get through the hard times? There's no question that there's always ups and downs in everything in life, right? You know, to me, and I've said this several times today as we've gone through this, I've made lots of errors in my career and in my life. I like to think those errors were more errors of judgment as opposed to of intent. You know, when we, and I'll talk broadly, you know, at our firm, when something goes wrong, you know, to me, that's the bigger learning situation. You learn more from, you know, when you screw up than your successes. But what's important about it is how you react to them on that side. You know, if you mess up and you don't take ownership of it, or you try and hide it, or you know, deny it, or you don't believe it, or you become emotional about it, that starts to spiral. You know, to me, you know, being honest, being non-emotional about it, recognizing that it happens again, you know, on the sports side, you know, in baseball, if you hit 3 out of 10 times, get a hit 3 out of 10 times, you're one of the best ever on that. So it really is about how you handle it, and how you handle it in terms of an emotional aspect, and how you from an emotional intelligence standpoint, sort of think through it. And sort of say, you know, here's how I'm going to move forward from it.
All right. There's a couple up here after that one there. Okay.
Hi, Michael. I'm Chuck Bush. I'm an adjunct here, and I teach the financial modeling boot camp, as well as one of the financial modeling classes. And one of the things that we're always trying to, that I teach my students, is that, you financial modeling is important. It's one of the fundamentals. How you value a company is incredibly important. But also how you interpret those results and take it to the next level is also important. So when we think about these skills and these courses, I'm curious to hear what you think the skills are that associates and analysts need today, and how do you think that will change in the next 5-10 years?
So I'll give you a bit of a shout out because I think financial modeling and the ability to create the models and how that all works it's an absolute imperative on that. You have to sort of understand how it works. And what's interesting about that, it's not just understanding how you add a column in Excel on that, but it's how you interpret the data that sort of comes out of that and how you create your formulas for that. So I'll give, when I was here, we were just starting to have spreadsheets and financial modeling.
Quattro Pro.
Huh?
Quattro Pro
Yeah,
you were
Quattro
using.
Pro. Yeah, exactly. So, it went from a situation where you just started or didn't even have it to it's an absolute imperative in terms of doing it. So one of the things I would say, the broader part of your question is where's it going? If I knew that, I'd be, clairvoyant on that. So I don't know exactly where it's going, but what I will say to that is just as technology comes into play and things like financial modeling, to use that as an example, becomes the baseline for, that used to be unusual and a differentiating trait. Today it's a baseline. So I think what's going to happen is the ability to analyze the data, the ability to bring in different types of technology is going to become more important, and that baseline of what you have to know keeps getting risen, and new things are going to come along. The new type of spreadsheet or the new online databases and things like that. So, and I think frankly what it'll do is it'll make younger, earlier career professionals more valuable on that side. So it went from, when I started, we spent half of our time making a page look pretty, formatting, putting the line in the right place or the dollar sign in the right column. If I had an analyst that spent time doing that today, they wouldn't be an analyst, right? So I think it's going to force more value-added components to it.
All righty. We've got a question over here.
Hi, Mr. Kramer. My name is Jocelyn Castillo, and my question is, how did it feel to transition from the big corporate world to smart partnership, and what was the learning curve behind that, and why did you leave the corporate world?
So I was never really in a big firm, right? My career has always been in what we've called boutique investment banks, so they're relatively small on that. So I've never had the experience of working in a Goldman Sachs or a Morgan Stanley or anything like that. So I don't know what it's like to work in a big firm, but as I sit here, I'd tell you I don't like it because it's not what I ever did. The firms that I was at are more established or more institutional than what we have today on that. So I think part of the answer is I wanted to do my own thing, and I wanted to build it the way I wanted to build it, and I wanted to give my partners the opportunity to sort of continue to build and participate in the career that they wanted to sort of build on. I have enough confidence to think that I can, compete at that level, and knock on wood, we are doing it. Last year, the Monsanto deal, for example, is the largest cash cross-border deal ever done on that, and we're this little firm, and every firm on the street would have died to have that. why else did I did it? And, I'm sure a bunch of people walked in here before and they Googled and did all the searches, and one of the things you'll see is the for lack of a better way to say, the last transition from my last firm was very rocky. We're still sort of fighting that out. So I was given the opportunity and at some level the push to go do it on my own, which is something I always wanted to do.
I have a question over here.
Hi, Wendy Gruhl. I'm an executive in residence here at the Nazarian College. Clearly you have an affinity to CSUN because you're here today and have been a supporter. What made you want to come to CSUN and the experience that you had, and to talk about to many of these students who have come here and are really going to be, I think, individuals who are going to be contributing to society and what they do. What was it about CSUN that you enjoyed, that you liked, and that drew you here and has drawn you to come back and be supportive?
So let's see, I think I'm second generation. So my dad and my mom went here. So my dad actually graduated when it was San Fernando Valley College on that. My mom graduated the year I graduated from high school. So she came back as a later in life. My aunt went here on that. My nieces, I have a niece that just graduated, so we're sort of, I guess the family would say at least 3 generations at the school. I was asked a question earlier today, why did I come to CSUN? Because my dad told me this is where I was coming. He said, it's a great school. I went there, I graduated there. It's more affordable than the other places, and you can live at home. And I'm not paying for anywhere else. So that's where I come. But why do I come back? Clearly I benefited from it. Clearly it's been a part of my life. It doesn't go far without someone saying, oh, you went to CSUN, not because they went there, but because they're like, most of the time back in New York, where is that? And I keep telling them it's the largest school that you've never heard of from that. So I kind of like it. I do. I kind of also think it's a bit of the underdog. I like the underdog component of it. I've been an underdog in every situation I've been in. So I kind of like it, and I think there's a lot of value to it.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Greg Marquette. I work in film and television finance. And recently, with Fox and Disney and AT&T and Warner Brothers, many of my compatriots have concerns about this too big to fail concept. And mergers, it seems like mergeritis right now, where prior administrations, by Glass-Steagall Act and various things that happened, things have gone up and down, up and down. What is your concern, and what is your belief about too big to fail?
I think it depends. It depends on the sector. It depends upon what's trying to be accomplished. I do think what we're seeing right now is a combination of the tails sort of growing. You got bigger companies getting bigger, and you have smaller companies becoming more innovative to them. One of the things that I think you will see as companies get bigger is not necessarily more systemic risk, but a loss of innovation coming out of the bigger companies. I think bigger companies historically have been sort of the incubator for innovation. But today, when you have well, I guess we have $1 trillion company now, right? Out there, when you have $1 trillion company, the concept of them spending $10 million, $50 million to innovate something new, it doesn't move the needle on that side. So I think what you have is you have a real opportunity as companies get bigger for smaller companies to actually create innovative solutions. I actually think the larger companies are going to embrace M&A more. Both on a large scale basis to keep up with size, but also as a way to, that's going to be their R&D. So what they'll do is they'll let the company go out and innovate and grow and become a 100 or 200 or $500 million company, and then they'll go buy that company on that side. And we've seen that come out already pretty significantly in the decrease in the number of public companies that are out there right now. I think as it sits today, we actually have less public companies than China does at this point in time. And just to go back in time, I think when Apple went public, they raised $50 million, 50. When Genentech went public, they raised $5 million. So, the public markets used to be open to much smaller companies on that. What happens now is that the development of private markets, you can finance companies in the private markets, and as they get bigger, instead of it going public, the bigger guys actually just come in and buy it. But I think you'll continue to see large-scale mergers. I don't think it's fair to say that this administration has embraced more large-scale mergers. They actually fought the AT&T Time Warner merger, and they actually appealed it. They just lost both times on that. The other thing that's going on is just instead of just antitrust or large things, you have what's called CFIUS. That's becoming a much bigger issue, and CFIUS has to deal with security issues. So the government has to approve the merger or sale of any important asset. So, for example, when we did the merger or the sale of Monsanto, we spent 18 months trying to get approval from the government because they deemed that as an important component of the food supply. And having that owned by a foreign company, they wanted to make sure that they had the appropriate controls on that. So I think there's other regulatory components of it that'll weigh in a little heavier.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hello, Mr. Kramer. Talking about mergeritis, I had a quick question about closely held corporations in California.
Of what?
Closely held corporations and how they could be possibly co-opted by another. And is there a way to kind of push it so that it happens, or is that not possible?
Privately held. Privately held. Is there a way to force them to merge?
Is there a way to buy them without them wanting to be bought?
So I think the general answer to that is no.
Right.
There are different situations that may come up, and I think they're more, the oddity than anything. So one of the things that goes on is when when companies borrow money, right? So they have debt and they get into financial trouble. You actually can take over a company through its contractual rights or the debt rights as opposed to the equity. But that's in a situation where they're experiencing some level of financial distress. Other than that or some forced regulatory component, I'm not aware of any way that you can force a private company to sell. The best advice I give you is overpay, because everybody will sell for too much money.
But so I understood, right? If the company is in financial straits and the bank is now the owner of the company, and they're willing to get rid of that debt?
Yeah, and then you have to go through the process of effectively foreclosing on them. There's a process called, affectionately called vulture investing out there where people come in and buy debt of companies with the sole purpose of actually converting it into ownership of the company. So I'll give you a perfect example right now. Everybody in this room is probably familiar with PG&E, the bankruptcy of PG&E. Well, it's a public company. There's a bunch of investors out there that are buying up the debt with hopes of ending up owning the equity of it when it comes out of bankruptcy.
And you said you have a small boutique company. Is there something that's smaller for people that are trying to do trying to find the steps into how to bring 2 companies together in that same predicament with the bank owning the company but wanting to buy that company because of their debt is more than what their equity?
There's companies at all different size levels.
Okay. Thank you.
Last question in the back.
Mr. Kramer, given your experience on the cross-border transactions that you discussed, Could you share your thoughts on global trade, protectionism, open markets?
In 2 minutes.
Yes, it's all there. Oh, geez, what would I say about that? So we're absolutely in a more globalized environment than we've ever been. I don't think that's going away. There can be more protectionism. There can be more, tariffs put in place and things like that. But the fact that we are a global economy, I don't think is going away. I do think a little bit of what's going on, that's a big conversation today about, the trade wars or potential trade wars with China and all that. I'm actually reasonably close with Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, and I've worked with him for years, and I think he actually said it really well. His view of the world was, you either think we're being treated fairly or you don't. If you think we're being treated fairly, you should be happy with the status quo. If you don't think we're being treated fairly, we have to do something about it, because China or whoever our trade partners aren't going to come to us and say, hey, we weren't treating you fairly, we'll cut a new deal with you on that. So, I do think there will be some volatility that comes out of it. We've seen it. I do think the government is doing everything they can to sort of mitigate that a little bit on that side of it. But these things are not stagnant, and they do have to change, and they do have to sort of, there's some push and pull behind them. But I think the most important part is we are not going to get out of the fact that we are in a global economy. The question is, what's our role in that economy?
Well, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.